chronologically
If anybody's
cross-referenced,
uncomfortable,
amazing
I'll put it
amount of
back
work.
on.
Yeah,
I'm sure
I
it
have the
is.
same. I have one in my purse.
Yeah,
That's my thing.
I had it on the grocery store this morning and I just,
Here we are.
I got two warm walking around.
Peace, brother.
Hi,
folks.
Hey.
Put it on.
It's
There's
funny,
no
it's-
sign.
We're not getting it up on the screen?
Oh, yeah, I forgot to turn it on.
No, so he's recording us, our conversation, our random.
Yeah, yeah, be careful what you say.
Okay.
You're being recorded, yes.
Let's not do
Well, that
that.
darn Reggie.
Karen, where's Karen?
Karen is making stuff for the funeral tomorrow.
Oh,
You-
okay. Dave's.
Shall we agree not to do these?
Yes.
Is that okay with everybody?
Fine by me.
Fine with me.
Okay.
I don't really want to work anymore,
Oh,
but I always.
Do you want to take a set to Karen?
Yes. What skis?
I already, we printed them here.
Okay.
Church paid for it.
And my printer ran out of ink about midway through me printing them, so I'm like,
Mhm.
he has some because,
You know, I have a magic printer. I have a an HP 3-in-1,
mhm,
and I have something called, I have a subscription to ink.
me too.
I never pay for ink.
Can you,
Pay for
you're not
ink.
gonna hide.
Refilling the
Hey,
cartridge
Lois.
magically in my printer.
Wow.
I haven't replaced a cartridge in a year and a half.
Well, we got the HP Instant Ink when the girls were at home. And I bought a plan that had a lot of pages because they were printing things all over the place for school. But I just had to buy an ink cartridge, which
Oh, they're expensive.
they're very expensive.
Yes.
But it's an older machine and they didn't send me a black one this time. Which they sent me the other three colors, but they didn't send me a black one this time, so I had to go buy one.
Ed, I was
Hello.
using
Not to settle, I presume.
Yep. Yes, I think so.
And I'm not trying to provide any answers. With the other presenters, we're talking about two, we're talking about Isaiah, whatever, it was a single book. I'm not,
No, we're not gonna do that. We're gonna go across books.
okay, if you said that, so it's like, okay, what do I do?
read them all.
That-
Read them all.
You wanna add-
Spoken like a
I know,
true
it's
professor,
stop.
read all. of it.
No, I deliberately did not do that. What I'm trying to accomplish.
It's time management.
It won't come together until the end.
Is there a test?
Yes, there will be.
What, a final
And
exam?
if you fail the test, you've got to go into remedial Bible
You go
study.
to purgatory.
What can I say? What can I say? Well, I don't know who else might be coming. I thought that Steve said he was coming.
He did.
Hopefully nothing's happened. Okay. I was expecting a couple by the name of Stitt. Okay, Denise and Chris Stitt.
I don't know.
They were going to participate. Okay. I guess, I'm assuming, obviously Kim is going to do it recording, yeah, because she's down in North Carolina. Ron Harold, you said, is doing the same thing. And Pat Wasson, I'm assuming that. Is she physically here or is she back from
No, she was
Mississippi?
physically in church this morning.
I did not see her. And Gail Ann, it doesn't have transportation.
No, we have Pat.
Pat is
Noah
not
doesn't
here.
come, Gail can't
Yeah.
make it.
Jean will not be here. Okay. So I
It was
guess,
so sweet. At the end of the church, we were all in the narthex talking. Pat wanted to go down, take her stuff. She had a bag and a purse and the two plate books. Said they would carry the stuff. And they went down to her car with her carrying the stuff so that she didn't have to carry it. Really cute.
that was nice. I talked to Dennis Fairbanks yesterday. He's not doing well.
She lives over on the other
We'll
side.
talk about that. Okay, so I guess that accounts for everybody. All right. First of all, I tell you what, why don't we open with a prayer and then we'll talk a little bit about where we're going because I want to address your question more completely, Barbara, if I may. Okay. Shall we bow our heads in prayer? Heavenly Father, we thank you for this opportunity to come together in fellowship and to consider your holy word. We would ask that you give us the patience and the discernment and the wisdom to try to glean from these all-important words the messages that you would have us receive. We know, Lord, that you inspired all of this from Genesis to Revelation. And it's just so enormous and so intertwined and complex that we need your help to understand it. We ask this as we begin this study. We ask that you give us that somehow that understanding that only comes through you. We ask all of this in your precious Son's name. Amen. Okay. All right. For the benefit of those that came late, Barbara asked a very poignant question about, are we going to go book by book? And I had to disappoint her by saying no. I'm sorry. My intent is to look across the Gospels by topic, if I may put it that way. In other words, we're going to take particular topics and look at what the four Gospels and Acts say about them. And try to get it. The analogy I used when I first sent out my first announcement was sort of like a detective game where you've got multiple witnesses. And when you try to put a picture together, when you're taking input from different witnesses, and certainly the four Gospels are different. I mean, there's a lot of commonality, but there's some important differences. So we'll try to make some sense of that. The point I would make is I'm no expert. Okay, it's as much a discovery process for me as it is for you. And I see this as a way to do a Bible study, to read the Bible differently. I would hope you would look at it that way and don't feel any pressure, because we're all going to be discovering together as to what are the truths. We will conclude, and I teased about the test. The test will be the important question: who was and is Jesus? And we will look at that at the end and say, okay, what have the Gospels and Acts told us about Jesus, and by inference about God? And if that's what we'll try to get an answer to.
If we can do that in 8 hours, you will be a genius.
Well, that's why I've given you a lot of homework.
My sense is it's not going to be Colonel Mustard in the library with the candles.
No, ma'am, it's not gonna be Colonel Mustard in the library. But anyway, that's what I'm gonna try to do. Admittedly, it's very ambitious. Okay, it's, I've never seen it, but I think it's a fresh way to look at material. We've all read the Gospels. It's a fresh way to look at them and say, okay, what are the kernels buried here across all the Gospels? And I hope that will work, and it'll work if we all kind of set our mind to it. Okay, with that as a beginning, we've determined who's here and not here. You've got a total of 6 handouts here. Okay, we may not make them all. We'll just go until the clock runs out. And we're going to start first of all with the Old Testament, chronology. Number 2, Old Testament and New Testament history timeline. So let's take a quick look at that, because I think there's some things in here I want to emphasize. You'll notice these are all numbered, these handouts. Okay, 2, 3. Number 1, by the way, was the description of the course that I sent you already. Okay, so, but the idea is that, I can tell you where I am, so we can all be together. And we'll just kind of look at it. As you look at the Old Testament, notice that the patriarchs go back to just a little beyond 2000 BC. Okay, that's the best estimate of when the patriarchs were. That's, of course, Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, who became Israel. And I mentioned that because one of the things to remember about this story that we're reading and is that it really only encompasses slightly more than 4,000 years up to today. And yet the world, they tell us that Earth is 4.5 billion years old. And that we've had men walking around for about 200,000 years. Just something to think about, okay? It may be that, God chose this point in time to begin to reveal himself, even though he's been there all along since he made it all. So there's just there's some way to consider it. Okay, you notice that the Israelites were in Egypt for about 430 years. Okay, from these are BC 1890 to 1460. Then 1460, and it should be 06, not 1420, just that's a typo, is the Exodus in the wilderness, approximately 40 years. That's when they, and of course,
06.
so yeah, it should be 06 rather than 14. But the thing to remember is that it didn't take 40 years to cross the Sinai. I mean, we know they were wandering around on Sinai, so they were literally wandering around. And God was leading them with a pillar of fire by day, a pillar of smoke by day and a pillar of fire at night.
It's also important to keep in mind that 40 is a symbolic year.
Of course. And whether or not it really was 40 years, we don't know. Then the next thing that comes, of course, is the Joshua and the Judges. Okay. And you can see that, that's basically Joshua and then a series of judges. Then the United Kingdom, where they had three kings, only three kings that ruled the United Israel. Saul, sort of, David, and Solomon. Note particularly the date 957, when the temple was completed. Because remember, the Lord did not let David build a temple. Okay. David had a plan all drawn up and he showed it to the Lord, and the Lord said, you're not, because you have sinned, you're not going to be allowed to do that. And he gave that assignment to Solomon. Okay, Solomon died in 931, approximately. And of course, these are all approximate dates. And his son his son Rehoboam took over. Jeroboam, who was a officer in the military, initially petitioned for reduction of taxes and including conscription of people. Okay, because Solomon because he was doing all the building, had to tax all the Israelites very heavily and conscripted people to come do the building, not just the temple, but other things that he was doing in Jerusalem.
So the tax was a human too?
Conscription, the same way that we have had conscription at times in our country.
Well, I understand that, but I mean, if if he's taxing a person,
They did that. They taxed people and they drafted people to work on
Okay.
projects. They did
Both.
both.
but the drafted people were considered part of the tax?
No,
I don't know, I don't think so.
no, they were separate.
Okay,
Yeah,
And
but
in fact, if I may,
please,
in fact, if you put this in perspective of the warnings at the beginning of Samuel, where Samuel says, kings will oppress you and tax you and take your people. This is actually what has happened with Solomon, where he starts out as a great king, and now we're seeing the downside of the monarchy.
yeah.
okay,
In fact, God said to him, they haven't rejected you, they've rejected me. He says, they don't realize what they're asking for. Okay, that's a point in itself. Anyway, so Jeroboam leads the 10 tribes away, and that's the beginning of the divided kingdom. The northern kingdom consisting of 10 tribes, and the southern kingdom of the tribe of Judah and the tribe of Benjamin. Okay, and of course, the southern kingdom had its capital in Jerusalem, the northern kingdom in Samaria. Notice as we go down here, I've highlighted places where Jerusalem's been attacked, and there are a bunch of them. Okay. You see the three that says here, and then talks about Assyria conquering Israel and its capital of Samaria. So there really were only 209 years of a divided kingdom. Now, the reason I'm taking a moment to cover this is it's all of this history, which ultimately builds to the expectations of the Israelites in Jesus' time. In other words, they know all this history of their country, of their world. And so that's the environment in which Jesus arrives. And, just turns everything upside down. Okay, continuing on. On the next page, we'll notice that there are 136 years of Judah only. After the northern kingdom fell, it was Judah only. Okay, for 136 years. But then Jerusalem was attacked by Syria. Now, this was in the time of King Hezekiah, he was, of course, king in Jerusalem. And Second Kings 19 tells, and also in Isaiah 36, okay, tells us about 185,000 Assyrians that were killed by the Lord. Now, they were laying siege to Jerusalem. Okay, if you want to go read those two stories, that's, okay, but the point is, again, it's all part of this buildup and the frame of mind that the Israelites had in 30 AD when Jesus began his ministry. You'll see. Moving on, again,
If I could just interject,
please.
just by your dates, roughly, we're talking about 1,000 years here.
Yes.
After, from Judah
Mhm.
of time, if you think about our environment now and go back 1,000 years, we're talking about medieval
Yep.
times.
Yes.
Trying to make it.
Yeah, no, you're exactly right. Okay. In fact, early medieval.
Yeah,
Okay. Yeah, you're right. And that's hard for us to visualize because we don't come from Jewish heritage. It's not built into what we learn as children. So
no,
sometimes,
but if you put it in the context of
Oh, abs-
Western Civ, it makes sense.
yes, absolutely. You notice in 605, Jerusalem was attacked by Babylon. We will find that in a short period of time, Babylon laid siege to Jerusalem 3 times. Question.
You want to bounce it to the TV?
Ah, here we are. Is that Denise and Chris?
Yes, it is.
Hi, welcome. We don't have you visual, but when you're on your iPhone.
Yeah, I've just been sick this weekend, so
Oh, well, I hope you feel better. Welcome.
thank you.
Did you get a chance? Did you print out the handouts?
No, we were planning on being in person, so we
Okay.
have them though on our phones.
Well, what I'll do is I'll try to talk it through for you. I will have a set for you next week if you come. Okay, if you just are able to come in person.
Yep.
Okay, but welcome. Okay, continue on. They were attacked in 605. Then down at the very bottom of page 2, they were attacked again in 597. In this case, a much larger group was taken. You notice that in the first group, that Daniel is believed to have been taken to Babylon. Okay, the second group includes Ezekiel. Ezekiel, as a prophet, never prophesied to Judah or to Jerusalem. He actually prophesied in exile in Babylon. Okay, then finally, they attacked a third time in 586 on the top of page 3. And that was when the temple was destroyed. So that was the end of the so-called First Temple period. From, again, in 953 is when it was completed. And it was destroyed in 586. So it did not exist very long. Okay. And remember that in the Jewish mind, or the Israelite mind of the time, that was where God resided. So the destruction of the temple was more than just the destruction of a church. It was the destruction of the place where God resided in their minds, because that was the whole concept. In the Holy of Holies was where God resided. And so, anyway, then
This is way off topic, but these names Yeah, are these people's actually names or some translation?
Absolutely. These are the names.
These are the names that were.
Which names are you asking me about?
Any, like Shish Bazaar or Zer-
Shes Bazaar?
those names, yeah. I mean, that's how they would have pronounced them back then.
Read the book. Well, that's in English, of course.
Right,
Okay, these are Hebrew names.
right.
Okay,
An English translation,
English translation.
through a
Right.
Greek translation, through a
Right.
Greek translation.
yeah. And bear in mind, if you want to read about them, read the books of Nehemiah and Ezra.
Yeah, right.
That's where these names show up.
Well, I know, I'm not saying,
Yeah,
I get where they came from today, but I just want to know if it was somebody really named Shish Bazaar, or they had a Hebrew name and it was translated.
I don't know that exactly.
And
That's a-
most of the Hebrew names actually meant something.
Yes,
It's not like Bob or Ed. I mean, it was like, you are a fighting knight in order, something like that. A brilliant star in the sky. I mean, that's how their names actually were put together.
if you look, for example, at the bottom of page 2, you see all of those, all of the prophets, minor prophets. You see there, I've got what the name means. I neglected to do that for the ones on page 3.
Would that be something like American Hebrew?
Yes, very similar. Running deer.
Yes,
Adele.
yes, no, that's
Yes.
same idea, yes. Okay,
But every once in a while you run into Daniel.
Or Saul.
Or Saul, yeah, which you.
Or David.
You can actually pronounce.
anyway, then continuing the theme of attacks on Jerusalem. It's that the whole of Palestine, including Jerusalem, is conquered by Alexander the Great in 332.
Can we go back a minute?
Please,
There's a piece that's important here that is theologically important, in that when the temple was destroyed and the people went to Babylon, they had to find a new way to worship God.
yep,
Because there was no place on earth where God was. And so we begin to see the concept of a God ever present overall,
everywhere,
not just limited to
Yes,
Mount Zion.
yes.
And that's a critical piece for Christianity.
Yes, no,
Makes sense.
that's, thank you, that's an excellent point. Of course, it's also the beginning of what we now know as synagogue worship,
Yes.
okay? That started to develop
Local community worship.
local community worship, yes.
And there's
As a-
another interpretation here that says that before they were actually pushed to Babylon, it's the first time you actually see a true one God belief, not a God among many, not the best God, not the king God, but the one God. is
That's
what
true.
we Begin to find when they're.
A
in
good
Babylon.
point, come on, that was an important turn in terms of their thinking about who God is. Okay, thank you for bringing that up, that's a good point.
That was in the, one of the videos that you had
Yeah,
asked us to take a look at, where they talked about the ancient Hebrews, Abraham and those had multiple household gods.
yeah. Well, not only that, but they acknowledge God in the continuum of gods around them,
Mhm.
not merely their household gods,
But all the gods.
and it's a very important change in concept.
Thou shalt
Yes.
have no other God before me, as
Mhm.
if there are other gods and you're gonna worship only this God.
Right.
Early on.
Yeah.
Now we're into one God.
Yep,
Mhm.
we'll get into something called the Shema.
Yes.
Okay. And that's, yeah, very good point, yeah. Okay, so anyway, then you see when the Septuagint was written, that was and by the way, that's only the Torah. Only the first 5 books of the Bible were translated into Greek in Alexandria, Egypt, because of the fact that a lot of the people, the Jews there, could no longer read Hebrew. So they had it's called the Septuagint because they have 70 scholars working on it. And then you get down to the period 190 to 64, okay, where they're under this, well, first of all, just above that, the Ptolemies. Remember, after Alexander died, his empire was divided among 4 generals. In Egypt was Ptolemy the First. And approximately where modern Syria is today was Seleucus the First. Yes, Seleucus. And it's those descendants, and they're two different Greek kingdoms. Initially, Israel fell under the Egyptian general, the Egyptian Greek general. Okay, eventually it was taken over by the Syrian Greek general in that family. And in 168, a fellow named Antiochus IV Epiphanes, okay, desecrated the temple. The temple had been rebuilt. You'll notice that up there in 516, had been rebuilt, but it was nowhere near the glory of Solomon's temple, nor as glorious as the temple became under Herod the Great. Most of the images we have of the temple are the temple of Herod the Great. So the temple was pretty modest, okay, after return from exile. Anyway, he desecrated, he sacrificed pigs in the temple, and he put a statue of Zeus in and the Israelites rose up. Okay, it's called the Maccabean Revolt. Okay, it's important because we get reminded of this every year. The celebration of Hanukkah is because of this revolt. Okay, and so
Part of the Bible that doesn't talk about that is in the Apocrypha, the first and second Maccabees.
Mhm.
yes,
And
that's
that
true.
gives you the history and interpret the history, but the history of that period of time.
Yeah, good point, because we in the Protestant Bible don't have that those books. But it is in the Catholic Bible and also in the Orthodox Bible.
It's in the middle of a lot of Bibles as an Apocrypha.
Oh,
I
yeah,
think
that's
I have
true.
it in here
Yeah.
somewhere.
Anyway, for about 100 years, okay, Israel was an independent country. Then in 63 BC, the Romans conquered it under Pompey the Great, who was later killed by Caesar. He and the two armies met, and ultimately Caesar had him killed. Okay, now notice further down at the bottom at 37 AD, Herod the Great, the Herod that we know of in the infant story of the Bible, because we're going to run into Herod again when during Jesus' ministry, but that's Herod's son, Herod Antipas. Herod the Great died in 4 BC. Okay, you see that on the last page. One of the reasons that we know that historically. One of the problems that presents for us is the story of the slaughter of the innocents. You know, the killing every boy, baby under 2 years old in Bethlehem.
Mhm.
Well, that could not have taken place on say the first year of AD, because Herod was already dead. So that presents a dilemma in terms of how we set the time for Jesus. And that's why you'll see I've got it down here showing Jesus actually born in 4 BC. Now, you know, this is not completely resolved by all the scholars. This is just, shall I say, the consensus view.
There's a lot, and I'll point out here
Please.
that Bob and I have different views on a number of these things, but that is neither one of those are right or wrong. Both of them are based on scholarship. And
Yes.
scholars disagree, as we learned in the Pauline letters,
Mhm.
scholars disagree, and there are
Well,
disagreements.
And of course, part of the problem is we have no original manuscripts. So what we're looking at is copies, later copies is the best we have. So some stuff has gotten distorted perhaps, we just don't
Well, and
know.
it's also, for lack of a better way to put it, lost in translation.
Well, that too,
Because when you have a translator translating from a language this ancient to another ancient language, to a more modern language, they're human. They leave things out that are either uncomfortable or too
And there-
difficult to
There
translate.
are copyist errors, because these were all
Exactly.
handwritten.
And it's
Yes.
handwritten copy letters, and somebody later on looks at a
fragment.
word
Oh.
or a fragment and says, well, that doesn't make any sense in any dictionary or any other thing, you know, so maybe it's just not a word. And leaves it out, but it might be an important word just spelled in a different way because there were no spelling.
There's stuff that-
no spell checkers, but there was also no spelling standard.
There's a book that just was published that talks about exactly that, translations, and according to this scholar, they didn't just depend on the Septuagint. That was the predominant one, the one we've heard about, but there were additional Greek translations that other people had made, and there were additional Hebrew versions of the Torah in circulation that had been written or copied down by different people, which really complicates the translation issue.
And then on top of all of that, when they went off to Babylon, was the beginning of putting together the Hebrew scriptures and editing them. The
There's always
Israelites
an editor.
themselves, and that continued for a period of time. And you'll notice my reference about a third of the way down on page 3. It was the beginning of the so-called Great Assembly. These were scholars, and there was several waves of editing would take place around the Old Testament scriptures. Okay. And they didn't actually have a completed scripture till about 200 AD. In Hebrew, yes. Yes, about 200 AD. Okay, so this is to get a feel for this is to understand where they were coming from when they heard Jesus. We are looking at it with 21st century eyes. And we read the Gospels. And you wonder why they reacted the way they did. And part of it was this whole history, because they expected God, and God had promised that he would rescue them. They had been, shall we say, in the wilderness for a long time. Okay. And so that's okay. Let's turn our attention to the New Testament, handout number 3. I have attempted, I don't think this exactly jives with the list that Peter put out. So please grant me some license. But I put the Gospels in, as you can see, to emphasize where they fall in the general list of the New Testament. Okay. We believe that the Gospel of Mark was written first, Matthew, Luke, and finally John. And I would incidentally mention in passing that Reggie believes that the Gospel of John was written first. I've been in class with him. He's taught that. So I'm not.
There are virtually no scholars that have been published in literature that you can pick up that say that.
Yeah, but that's his personal
He's
interpretation.
entitled.
Absolutely. Yeah, but anyway. So you can see, I won't spend a lot of time with this. Take a second to look it over. It's pretty self-explanatory. I put down for the 4 Gospels how they see Jesus. That's part of the reason that we have to go across Gospels, because they each see Jesus differently. Okay, and that's what we're going to try to pull together. Okay, any questions about that?
I would rephrase John's Jesus is God. I think a better way of saying the way John has written it is Jesus as the pre-existent
Sounds good.
wisdom.
Okay,
Which over
Okay.
time we have accepted as God, but I'm not sure he wrote it as God. Pretty sure he wrote it as somebody who was involved in the creation as a pre-existent person.
Yeah.
Being a little complicated. John is complicated.
well, it is, and the whole subject of the Trinity is complicated. We're not going to spend a lot of time on that, okay? That's something that you have
We
to.
could spend all 8 weeks on it.
Yes,
Not
that's
get
true.
anywhere else.
Well, and I'm not qualified, so I'm not even going to attempt it. I'm not going to make a fool of myself. So that brings us then to handout number 4. Let me close that door.
It's the Greek, breaking up. the
Yeah.
Greek.
Oh, sorry. Time change always.
Now,
says that.
you may wonder why I am introducing this topic, the attributes of God. I'm going to let you read it yourself. The reason that it's important is we're gonna look at how does Jesus' ministry and what he says about God jibe with this, and where does it fit? All kinds of different ways. You'll notice that I've grouped them into two categories. There's a category of divine king, what are called uncommunicable attributes. That is, attributes that only belong to God, could never belong to us. There's a second set of attributes, and actually there's a mistake. There's a second set of attributes down at the bottom of page 2, where attributes that God could communicate to us, like the attribute of love, for example. Okay? Now, we could spend a lot of time on it, and the point is, I'm setting a framework here. Because as we look at the Gospels and what Jesus says and does, we will be from time to time referring to some of these attributes, not all of them. But they'll be in the category of Roman numeral 2, the bottom of 2. Okay? We got gracious, forgiving, loving. These are all attributes that have to do with mankind. So just it, and we will, and one of the ones that I want to emphasize, because it's something that comes up and is one that it's easy to misunderstand. Look under Roman numeral 2, item D, about a third of the way down page 2. The attribute that I would point to there is glory. And we're going to find that in the New Testament, there's a lot of reference to God's glory.
That's one.
You mean? Roman
It said
numeral
1,
Yeah, did I say Roman 2?
you said 2.
Oh, excuse me, my mistake. Well, Roman number 1, yes, thank you. And item D, glory. That's one of those attributes. They talk a lot about God's glory, and ultimately, in the Gospel of John, we're talking about Jesus praying that he will be glorified. Now, the key understanding is, what does glory mean? We normally think of that in human terms. You know, whether you get military glory or political glory or, you know, sports glory because you're a winner. This is something very much larger, okay? It has to do with his majesty and his reputation. And he says to us, and we'll look at a passage out of scripture. He doesn't intend to share his glory with anybody. That's another way of saying about other gods. It's the same point. Okay? And that's something, it'd be easy for us humans to interpret that as vain or petty. But it's just, that's really dealing God a short straw. He's much bigger than that. And that's the problem. He's much bigger than we can possibly imagine.
Let me say that in our literature, because the Greek word for glory is doxa, and the doxology is glory to God.
Yeah. No, thank you. That's very good. Yeah. So just be thinking about that. We will refer back to this. I'm not going to spend a lot of time, but we will refer back to this from time to time. And there'll be certain ones that you'll see they'll come up. And when we start looking at the Gospels and particular subjects, as I referred to it previously, one of the subjects will be glory. I just point that to an example. So anyway, okay, so that takes us to an apps, right, but just as if on cue. Okay, you notice one of the attributes is sovereign. That's Roman numeral 1A. Our next handout is about sovereignty, amongst other things. Okay. And this may seem as though I'm playing games, but please don't think that, because it's when you start looking and understanding who Jesus is, it's got to be in the context of God. Jesus was not only sent by God, but everything he said and did was in that context. And, you know, it's important for us to remember that because it's easy to try to domesticate Jesus, you know, or those that would talk about being a great moral teacher. But it's so much more than that. And that's what I hope you'll see with me as we go through this course, because then we start looking at specific subjects. So anyway, moving on. All right, turn to handout number 5, please. I am going to ask us to take, we don't have time to look at every single scripture reference. I've selected some, I've got notes on here. Notes on which ones that I'd like to spend a second on. And they all are by way of making the point of this particular subject and where they came from. I have included both Old Testament references as well as New Testament references. I do that because, again, of this basic theme of it all being one book from Genesis to Revelation. Now, you may not agree with that, but that's how I'm coming at it. And so you can, you know, so let's, with the beginning, let's first of all, obviously, certain of the scripture references have been enlarged. So that makes it pretty obvious that they're right at the very top. Okay, for example, you'll notice that they're in 14 point, most of the stuff is in 12 point. Okay. Let's just take a second to read the very first, because I want to make a point here. Genesis 1:1-3. With your permission, I'll read it. In the beginning, God created the heavens and the earth. Now the earth was formless and empty. Darkness was over the surface of the deep, and the Spirit of God was hovering over the waters. So that's the first reference to the Spirit.
Interesting to point out that it's in Hebrew, and the Hebrew word for spirit is ruah, which is
Ruach.
also the Hebrew word for breath.
Breath
Breathe.
or wind.
Right.
Yes, yes. And you have the Greek word too, from which we get our word pneumatic. Okay. But the other thing to notice is that he spoke the world into existence. And you know that in John's gospel, the coming of Jesus as the word. So that's the connection I'm trying to make here. Okay, now down to Genesis 2:7. Okay, if you would, Penny,
Genesis 2:7.
about the middle of the page.
Then the Lord God formed, in parens like a potter, a man, Adam, in Hebrew, homo in Latin, from the dust of the ground, Adama in Hebrew, and breathed into his nostrils the breath of life. And the man became a living being.
Couple of things to note here. The reference to Adam. In Hebrew, that's Adam. The emphasis on a different syllable.
Right.
Okay, but the point is that's where we get our word Adam, our English word. Okay, and of course I mentioned the thing, but the more important thing to note is the word Adama in Hebrew, the dust of the ground. That's their word. That's the word in Hebrew, and of course we know that he gathered the dust up and breathed life into it.
It's always been a conflict between that and the early creation that says, so God created mankind in his own image. The image of God created he them, male and female created he them.
Yep,
That's a transcendental God, whereas the form of the bust is an anthropomorphic God.
yep. And in this list, remember I talk about transcendence.
But it's a confusing piece, and the way the scholars have described that is they were both written by different groups.
Yes, yes.
One wrote the first one on the male and female created he them, actually is from a later
right.
writing than.
We think that was when, the time when not rabbis, is it the rabbinical?
No, it's actually in Babylon. And
Oh,
that
that-
piece is I think it's called the Elohim,
Elohim, yes.
and it was a later translation and creation of the Genesis story, which runs through here. Those two themes run through.
Absolutely, absolutely.
What were the two types you said? One is
There was the-
transcendental and what's the
Oh,
other?
anthropomorphic, like walked in the garden, closed the door of the ark. That's an anthropomorphic God. It's an anthropomorphic vision of God.
Okay, let's turn our attention to right at the bottom of the page, Exodus 20:11. Ed, if you would, please.
For the 6 days, the Lord made the heavens and the earth, the sea, and all that is in them. But he rested on the seventh day. Therefore, the Lord blessed the Sabbath day and made it holy.
And of course, we know in Jewish tradition, that's actually Saturday on our calendar. Okay, they start Sabbath Friday night and it goes into Saturday. But one of the reasons I bring it up is we're going to run into one of the things we'll look at across the Gospels is Jesus referring to himself as the Lord of the Sabbath. And just what does that mean? We'll see. That'll be one of the things we'll be looking at. Okay, and how do we interpret that? What does that say about Jesus? Okay, we'll pick a couple more and then we'll move on. Right at the top of the page 2, the Shema Israel, which is, as indicated there from Deuteronomy 6. That same terminology is picked up in Mark. Mark is the only one of the Gospels that picks up that exact terminology. You get a more abbreviated form of it in both Matthew and Luke. But the key thing here, we all know about the Lord our God, love the Lord your God with and so on, so on, so on. Back up a bit and look at the very first few words. Hear, O Israel. That's what the word Shema means. Hear. And by the way, by inference, obey. Because Shema is a Hebrew word. Okay? So that's the important thing to remember here. You'll find that there'll be several places in the Gospels where we would talk about, for those who have ears, let them hear. As if people aren't listening. And that's where that is rooted. That's rooted in right here in this particular passage. Okay. Nehemiah 9:6 is self-explanatory.
You want me to read?
Yes, and that please.
Nehemiah 9:6, you alone are the Lord. You made the heavens, even the highest heavens, and all their starry host, the earth and all that is on it, the seas and all that is in them. You give life to everything, and the multitudes of heaven worship you.
Peter, you up to doing Psalm 8?
Of course. Lord, our God, how majestic is your name in all the earth. You have set your glory in the heavens. Through the praise of children and infants, you have established a stronghold against your enemies to silence the foe and the avenger. When I consider your heavens, the work of your fingers, the moon and the stars, which you have set in place, what is mankind that you are mindful of them, human beings that you care for them? You have made them a little lower than the angels and crowned them with the glory and honor. You made them rulers over the works of your hands. You put everything under their feet, all flocks and herds and the animals of the wild, the birds of the sky and the fish in the sea, all that swim in the paths of the seas.
You've undoubtedly seen that before. That's not, but just take a moment to ponder that and the enormity of that statement. And we will ask ourselves, to what degree is Jesus coming a manifestation of that kind of love and caring for us mere humans? So think about that. Anyway, I don't know how our time is. Let me see. Oh my gosh, we're running out of time. I think most of these are self-explanatory. Let's turn our attention briefly on page 4, to the quotations from the New Testament. Penny, if you would, please, Matthew 19:26, near the top of page 4, where we start the,
Jesus looked at them and said, with man, this is impossible. Possible, but with God, all things are possible. Okay.
you look quizzical.
Well, there was the second possible. there.
Impossible, comma, possible. It's confusing.
Is that a typo? I'm getting
Yes, that's a mistake.
Just
Yeah.
remove possible.
Delete that second possible right after the
a-
comma.
okay. With
Yes.
man, this is impossible. With God, all things are possible.
Yes, thank you. Okay. And then right after that, Ed, John 1:1.
The word became flesh. In the beginning was the Word, and the Word was with God, and the Word was God.
We understand that, that's of course from John's gospel. We understand that to be referring to Jesus. Okay. And finally, and Ed, if you would please, John 8:58.
Very truly, I tell you, Jesus answered, before Abraham was born, I am. At this, they picked up stones to stone him, but Jesus hid himself, slipping away from the temple grounds.
You want to read the
Exodus 3.
you'll find in this copies that I sent you electronically that when I have an Old Testament tied to a New Testament, the Old Testament's in green. So that should be green. Of course, it doesn't, it's printed black and white. So
Exodus 3:14, God said to Moses, I am who I am. This is what you are to say to the Israelites. I am has sent me to you.
this is where Jesus, or excuse me, where Moses is saying to God, who shall I tell them sent me? When he's to go to the Israelites in Egypt. This is how God answers the question. And that's the significance of that quote from John 8. Because this is a situation where Jesus is saying, I am God. In essence, that's what he is saying.
That's certainly an interpretation.
All right, you offer a different one?
No, I just have to say that's an interpretation.
And needless to say, when we look at that section of scripture, we'll look at this again. The Pharisees and the authorities, they tried to stone him at that point, and he sneaked away. They didn't get it.
Because that's blasphemy.
It is absolutely blasphemy from their perspective, absolutely. Because they can't envision the possibility that God would send,
Well, and their version, if I can say that,
yeah,
of God would not be standing in front of them.
that's right.
You know, their version of God is in the Holy of Holies
Yep,
and not something they are allowed to see.
that's correct. And of
So,
course, when he goes to the cross, it's even more confusing.
yes.
How could God possibly die?
Mhm.
That's the dilemma we have is essentially, it's a faith question.
Mhm.
There are no intellectual answers. There are no nice,
No.
neat answers. All right, well, since we're getting close to time,
That's why it's
let's
called a holy mystery.
holy mystery, absolutely. That's one of the attributes. God is mysterious.
Well, I find it interesting too, the difference of the first person's use of the first person singular, I am who I am, versus the pontifical we
Yes,
use of.
that's a good point. It's an excellent point. But of course, I don't remember God ever using the pontifical we.
No, that was
Because he's
adopted
God.
later on.
That would imply there's more than one.
That's right. Yeah, no, but it's,
Well,
it's a
but
good
it
observation. I hadn't thought of
focuses
it.
on,
Yeah,
You know,
Yeah,
where
no.
the Pope might be talking about
of course.
we as a community or the
Well,
queens.
the kings and queens of England refer to themselves, we are not amused.
Right,
Yes,
right, it's the same thing. It's
That's a
it's more of
human construct.
community.
that's not
Yeah.
God's construct. Yeah, no. Peter, if you would, please, on that same page, Roman 9, 20 to 21.
This is
There
fine.
you go.
Thought, yes. Page 4, about 2/3 of the way down.
But who are you, a human being, to talk back to God? Shall what is formed say to the one who formed it, why did you make me like this? Does not the potter have the right to make out of the same lump of clay some pottery for special purposes and some for common use?
Obviously, the answer is yes.
Well, that fits into Romans when he's discussing why the example he uses are Isaac and Esau. And I mean, he picks out why some people were succeeded, the junior, not the elder.
Yes,
And so how could that be? Because God is the potter and he chooses. what
he
to
makes
make.
the rules.
Yeah.
And he's, yeah, he can change it. Fine, I would, just on page 5. Okay, Colossians 1 to 16 through 17, let me read that. For in him all things were created, things in heaven and on earth, visible and invisible, whether thrones or powers or rulers or authorities. All things have been created through him and for him. He is before all things, and in him all things hold together. Now, we have been taught that. But if we take a moment to say, okay, and we're going to look at Jesus' ministry, which is where we're headed, we want to put it in that context. Okay. Yeah, if he is the Son of God, and this is the God that created everything, then maybe we look at Jesus a little differently in terms of interpreting the Gospels and Acts. And I left at the very bottom there, I had a couple of quotes from the hymns, just for you to consider. Obviously, we've gone over this very quickly. We're not going to get to 6 and 7. Okay, so we'll have to do those next week. But suffice it to say that, this is where we're trying to go. We're trying to understand these portions. We'll start getting into, for example, Jesus' birth. We'll look at Jesus' birth. And one of the things we'll figure out is the different variations after his birth. In the one gospel, he goes to Egypt. Okay? In the other, he's presented at the temple. What can we draw from that? Because obviously they can't have both occurred at the same time. That at least doesn't seem logical. Maybe it isn't essential that we answer that. That's the kind of thing that we're going to be looking at. Okay. We'll find out, if you know in Luke, for example, where he's presented at the temple, of course, he runs into Simeon. Simeon has that long soliloquy that he offers, known as the Nunc Dimittis. So these are the kind of things we're going to be looking at. Any questions at this point? Okay, any comments? Anything you would like to see different? You now know where this is going. It may or may not make sense to you. Okay. Please feel free to offer your comments, or even if you think of them later, I'm as near as the email. Don't hesitate. This is something we're going to try to walk through together.
This is an incredible amount of research.
Yes, it is.
Thank you. Yeah. So, okay. And the same applies to you folks out there in Zoom land. Hey, Sharon, I didn't realize you had joined us. Welcome. But the same comment applies to all of you, okay? You see where I'm trying to go with this? And, as I say, if I do have extra copies of the handouts, if I can get them to people, okay? If you have not had a chance to print them out, because there'll be a lot of paper. And so, anyway.
I made a whole new binder just for.
Maybe two.
Yeah, and I will try to, they'll all be numbered, so they'll fit in a logical order.
Good,
Good, so, anyway.
be probably the first Bible thing I've ever done that's in logical order.
Anyway, in closing, are there any prayer requests that we have for anybody?
That was,
What's the latest with Pat?
no, it's just with so much she has to deal with the death of her husband, her son, her sister. It's just an amazing load that she's carrying.
She's still here now, right?
Yeah.
You said you saw her in church.
Dottie Shoemaker. Best friend, Dottie.
I don't know how many of you know Dennis Fairbanks. I talked to Dennis yesterday. He's struggling. He's, in addition to all the other problems he's got this thing called myasthenia gravis. I don't.
Myasthenia gravis.
Yeah, myasthenia gravis. In addition, he's got severe arthritis.
Oh, gosh.
He's got AFib. And if that's not enough, he's got a hole in his retina in his left eye. And he's got a cataract in the right eye, which they can deal with. He's going to get cataract surgery in mid-April. But, he's there, but for the grace of God, go wait. Okay,
Definitely.
so anybody else? Yeah.
Bob, I have a
Yes,
question
please.
about Dennis. Is he worse? Or this is the same thing he had when I last talked to him, and he was getting everything in order, all his ducks in a row. To have everything repeated, all his cardiac clearance and all, because he passed the time with the 3 months or whatever, and things were coming along and his retina had improved. Is that still on schedule, I gather?
I think his retina deterioration in the left eye.
Yeah,
He's got a hole in the retina, and they say it's not going to get any larger. So in other words, it stopped whatever.
okay,
He
okay,
does not have that problem in the right eye. But because of these problems, he's got vision. He can't even watch television well because he's got severe cataract in the right eye.
yeah,
But that's something they can deal with. And as you point out, because of all the other underlying issues, they're reluctant to do certain things to him. I mean, he's got AFib, he's got myasthenia gravis, and he's got severe arthritis.
What is myasthenia gravis?
Myasthenia, I believe is what it's pronounced. I'm not sure what it is.
But it's bad.
But it can keep you from doing normal stuff like going to the grocery store or putting on your clothes, or it just.
Yeah.
It prevents. And
He's had it for a long time. It's not something,
it doesn't go away. It's
It
not
doesn't go-
anything that.
once
can
you
be
get
cured.
it, it's with you for the rest of your life. He's had it for a long time, and one of the things, he's taking a lot of steroids for it. So you got all the issues from long-term use of
Yeah, you
steroids.
can, long-term use of steroids can affect your kidneys and
Yeah, so he's,
all that kind of stuff.
but he talk about a real Christian. He's a really good guy, and that's why it's,
Because he used to be on Zoom with these classes.
yes,
We probably can't.
he just can't see
it
anymore.
well enough to do.
Yeah. I talked to him, I was hoping to get him to join us.
We
Anyway,
can do an audio.
Denise and Chris, okay, we're really glad to have you guys. Okay, we look forward to meeting you in person at some point. Okay.
Thank you very much. I was just going to say thank you very much. We're really happy that we could join in this week, even remotely. So hopefully be there in person next week.
Okay, well, you know where we are, okay, and just down the hall from the sanctuary, right by the Coke machine. It's the room right behind, beside the Coke machine. So,
Perfect. Thank you.
yeah. Okay. That's all I've got.
All right.
Good beginning.
That's the beginning.
Thank you, thank you. You've already got 2 of the handouts for next week, so you can study.
I'm disappointed. I was expecting another 6.
It's not next week yet. Didn't we change
Bob,
something?
Bob,
Yes, ma'am.
Bob, will there be more handouts next week?
Could you turn towards the computer just a little bit, Lois? Your voice
Well-
fades in and out.
Will there be more handouts next week?
Oh, of course. You know me.
Bob is the king of handouts.
Oh, he is.
Remember when we
But-
used to do that and I'd drive you guys crazy?
Yeah, but this week was a doozy. I thought maybe that was covered.
Bobby,
We really haven't gotten into the Gospels yet.
And I really brought my Bible because the last time you made us read whole chapters.
That's true.
well, Bob, I'm really kicking myself because I've known you all these years and I knew to expect this, but I did not buy any Hewlett Packard stock before the class.
What can I
You
say?
never want to make it easy.
I think we've got another brand of printer here at the church because I printed the stuff here at the church.
Thank you, Bob.
Take care. Have a good day, guys.
Thanks, Bob.
Thank you.
Side door, Bob?
I'm sorry.
You gonna lock the side?
I'll lock it, yes.